He thought I couldn't live without him. Here's the truth. He thought she would never leave. He thought she was too afraid, too dependent, too small to stand on her own. But one ordinary morning became the day she walked away. And that single step changed everything. Amara was 27 when she realized her life felt smaller than it should. She lived in a weathered blue house near the edge of a coastal town, the kind of town where the ocean could be heard at night and where gulls circled the rooftops in the early hours. To anyone passing by, her life might have looked ordinary, even peaceful. But behind the closed door, peace was something she had forgotten. Daniel, her partner of 6 years, was admired by nearly everyone. He worked at a shipping company, wore pressed shirts, and always shook hands with neighbors. When people spoke his name, they added, charming, or confident, or a man who knows what he's doing. And maybe that was true outside the house. Inside, Daniel's charm often curdled into sharp words, mocking laughter, and commands that carried no room for choice. "Where were you?" he would ask, whenever Amara returned late from the grocery store. His tone carried suspicion, though her bags held nothing but bread, milk, and fruit. "You know I don't like waiting." "I was only a few minutes longer," she would reply softly, pressing her lips into a thin smile, hoping to smooth the edges of his anger. "Next time, don't make me wonder," he'd mutter, and she would nod, swallowing the lump in her throat. In the early years, Amara mistook his control for protection. When he told her to stay home instead of meeting her friends, she thought it was because he wanted her company. When he laughed at her dream of becoming a photographer, she believed maybe he was right, that dreams were luxuries, and reality required sacrifice. But as time went on, a heaviness settled in her chest. She woke each morning with her stomach tight, unsure which version of Daniel she would face that day. Would it be the one who kissed her forehead and joked about the weather, or the one who criticized her cooking, her clothes, her voice, her silence? She began to shrink inside herself, moving carefully through rooms, keeping her words measured and her emotions hidden. Yet, despite the fear, a flicker of longing remained. At night, when Daniel fell asleep, Amara would scroll through old photographs on her phone, pictures she had taken years ago of the ocean, children playing near the docks, flowers blooming in cracks of concrete. Each image reminded her of a self she had abandoned, a self who once believed she could capture beauty and share it with the world. Sometimes she would whisper into the dark, "I miss me." It was during one of her evening walks that she felt the truth most strongly. Daniel worked late on Tuesdays, and those were her small hours of freedom. She would slip on her sandals and head toward the shore, letting the sand sink beneath her steps. The waves rose and fell in a rhythm that felt older than her pain, older than Daniel, older than the house that held her. She would stand there, staring at the horizon, and think, the tide always returns, and so can I. But courage is not something that comes all at once. For months, Amara carried the thought in silence, testing its weight, asking herself if she had enough strength to choose differently. Each time Daniel belittled her, each time he reminded her that she was lucky to have him, the thought grew louder. What if I'm not lucky? What if I'm trapped? The moment that broke her came unexpectedly. One Tuesday evening, Daniel returned home earlier than usual, his voice already sharp with irritation. He tossed his keys on the counter and demanded dinner immediately. Amara hurried to serve him, her hands trembling as she carried the plates. He took one bite, wrinkled his nose, and pushed the food aside. "This tastes awful. Can't you do anything right?" he snapped. Her cheeks flushed, but she stayed silent. He grabbed his phone and, with a mocking grin, called a friend. As Amara stood in the kitchen doorway, she heard him laugh. "Can you believe she once thought she'd be a photographer?" he told his friend, his voice loud enough for her to hear. "A photographer. As if anyone would pay for her pictures. She should be grateful I kept her fed." The words stung sharper than ever before. She had endured countless insults, but hearing him laugh at her dream to someone else was unbearable. It wasn't just cruelty, it was erasure. He was trying to erase the part of her that still hoped. That night, Amira lay awake long after Daniel had fallen asleep. His steady breathing filled the room, but her mind was loud with thoughts. She stared at the ceiling, tracing invisible lines across the plaster. Is this it? Is this my whole life? To be small, to be silent, to be invisible? Her chest ached with the answer she had avoided for years. No, this cannot be my life. By dawn, she knew what she had to do. She moved quietly as the sun began to rise, slipping from the bed and gathering what little she owned. Her old camera, still in its box, went into her bag. She pulled out the small envelope of savings she had hidden in a shoe behind the closet. Money she had tucked away coin by coin, never sure why. Only knowing it gave her a tiny spark of safety. She folded a few clothes, her journal, and nothing more. When Daniel stepped into the shower, humming loudly as the water ran, Amara's heart pounded. Her hands shook as she zipped her bag. For a moment she stood in the hallway, staring at the door. The silence pressed against her ears. Her whole body trembled. Then she opened it. The click of the lock sounded louder than any thunder. She stepped outside into the cool morning air, the smell of salt strong in her lungs. Her feet touched the road, and with each step, her fear loosened. Her heart beat hard, but she walked forward, not looking back. Daniel emerged from the shower minutes later to find the bed empty. At first, he smirked. She'll be back, he told himself. She has nowhere to go. She can't live without me. But as the hours stretched into days, his confidence thinned. Her phone remained silent. The house stayed empty. No one had seen her at the market, at the shore, or anywhere in town. She had walked away, and his words no longer bound her. Amara, meanwhile, boarded a bus out of the coastal town. She sat by the window, clutching her bag, her reflection mingling with the blur of fields and roads rushing past. Fear still lingered in her chest, but beneath it was something new, a quiet strength, a spark of possibility. She did not know exactly where she was going or how she would survive. But for the first time in years, the choice was hers. And with every mile the bus carried her away, she felt the weight of Daniel's voice fading, replaced by the sound of her own heartbeat, steady and free. The bus ride away from her town lasted only 3 hours, but for Amara, it felt like crossing an ocean. Each mile stretched into a chapter she was leaving behind. She sat by the window clutching her bag, her reflection faint in the glass. Outside, the coastline gave way to rolling fields, then suburbs, then finally the crowded sprawl of a city she had never seen. Her heart pounded when she stepped onto the pavement. The air was thicker here, filled with car exhaust, the smell of street food, and the endless noise of people who looked like they knew where they were going. Amara didn't. She stood frozen for a moment, the crowd moving around her as if she were a rock in a stream. For years, Daniel had been her map, her compass, her constant voice, even if it was cruel. Now, without him, there was only silence and choice. It was terrifying, but it was hers. She found a cheap room in a boarding house down a narrow street. The building leaned slightly, its paint chipped, its stairs creaking with every step. Her room was no larger than a storage closet. A single bed pressed against one wall, a small desk beneath a dusty window, and a wardrobe that smelled of mothballs. She ran her hand over the peeling wallpaper and whispered to herself, "It's mine." The first nights were the hardest. Alone in the dim room, she would lie awake listening to the muffled sounds of neighbors through thin walls. Snoring, laughter, a baby crying, footsteps up and down the stairs. Every sound reminded her she was far from home, far from anyone she knew. At times, she wanted to pick up her phone and call Daniel, if only to hear a familiar voice. But she didn't. Instead, she placed the phone face down on the desk and stared at the ceiling until morning. Money was tight. The envelope of savings she had hidden for years seemed thinner with each passing day. She ate sparingly, instant noodles, bread, apples from a corner stand. Sometimes she skipped meals just to stretch her money a little further. Hunger gnawed at her, but she told herself it was better than being fed in a cage. Every morning, she forced herself onto the streets to search for work. The city was full of jobs, but not for someone with no experience, no references, and nothing but determination in her eyes. She walked for hours, her shoes wearing thin, asking the same question at shops, markets, and cafes. Are you hiring? Most shook their heads. Some didn't even look at her. Each rejection was like a stone added to her shoulders, and at night, lying in bed, she heard Daniel's voice mocking her. You'll be back. You can't make it without me. She would curl beneath her blanket, tears sliding silently onto the pillow, hating how his words still lived in her head. On the seventh day of searching, her luck changed. She stepped into a small cafe tucked between two tall buildings, almost hidden from the main street. The bell above the door jingled, and the warm smell of coffee wrapped around her like a blanket. Behind the counter, a man wiped down glasses. His hair was messy, his apron stained, but his eyes were kind. Are you hiring? Amara asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The man studied her for a long moment. Part-time mornings. It doesn't pay much. Ever worked in a cafe? Amara shook her head. No, but I can learn. Please. I'll learn something in her tone, or maybe the way she held herself, convinced him. He handed her an apron the next morning. The cafe became her anchor. At first, she fumbled with trays, spilled coffee, and burned her fingers on the steam wand. Customers complained, and Amara blushed with shame. But each mistake taught her something. Within weeks, her hands grew steady. She learned how to grind beans, froth milk, and balance 3 cups in one hand. The rhythm of the cafe, machines hissing, spoons clinking, doors opening and closing, became familiar, even soothing. The owner, Victor, never asked about her past. He only told her when she was doing something right and when she needed to try again. At closing time, he would hand her leftover bread or a small container of soup. No sense letting it go to waste, he'd say casually. But Amara felt gratitude deep in her bones. With her first paycheck, she stood in front of the mirror in her tiny room and unfolded the bills slowly, as if they might disappear. Her reflection looked different. Tired, yes, but also proud. She whispered, I did this. Me? It was the first time in years she had said those words without fear of contradiction. In the evenings, she pulled out her old camera. At first, she didn't know what to photograph. The city was vast and overwhelming, and she worried her eye for beauty had gone dull. But then she noticed small things: raindrops sliding down her window, neon lights reflected in puddles, an old man feeding pigeons in the park. She began to capture them quietly, one by one. Her photos were not perfect, but they felt alive. She posted a few online under a simple account with no personal details. To her surprise, strangers began to notice. Comments trickled in. This feels like a movie scene. I love the colors. You have an eye for details. Each word lifted her higher, reminding her that Daniel's voice wasn't true. His laughter wasn't lawful, but the doubts still haunted her. Some nights, exhaustion broke through her defenses, and she would hear his voice again. No one will pay for your pictures. You're nothing without me. She would close her eyes tight, whispering, I am not nothing, until the words replaced his. Months passed. Her savings stopped shrinking because her wages kept them steady. She learned the city streets, made friends with other workers in nearby shops, and even laughed again. Soft, cautious laughter at first, then freer, louder. She was rebuilding herself piece by piece. One afternoon, a woman who had seen her photos online messaged her. She wanted someone to take pictures at her daughter's birthday party. Amara's heart raced as she typed her reply. She said yes, though fear clenched her stomach. Could she really do it? What if she failed? The party was held in a backyard filled with balloons, music, and children's laughter. Amara's hands shook as she lifted her camera, but once she began clicking, instinct took over. She captured the glow of candles, The joy on the birthday girl's face, the way her parents looked at her with pride. She didn't just take pictures, she froze emotions in time. When the woman hugged her afterward and pressed cash into her hand, Amara nearly cried. Not because of the money, though she needed it desperately, but because someone valued her work. Someone believed her dream was worth paying for. That night, back in her small room, Amara stared at the photos. They were simple, but they were hers. She realized she had crossed an invisible line. She was no longer just surviving. She was living. Far away, in the coastal town she had left, Daniel sat with friends and laughed. "She'll be back any day," he said. "She probably can't even feed herself. She can't live without me." His friends nodded politely, but inside, even they wondered. Why hadn't she returned? Daniel didn't know the truth. Amara wasn't starving. She wasn't begging. She wasn't broken. She was out there in the world, working, growing, proving him wrong with every sunrise. And she wasn't coming back. Daniel had always believed he was unshakable. He had built his pride on control, on the idea that Amara would orbit him forever, dependent on his approval. But as weeks turned into months and she still hadn't returned, a seed of doubt began to grow in his chest. He masked it with arrogance when his friends asked where she had gone. "She'll run out of money," he scoffed. "She'll come crawling back." "You'll see, she can't survive on her own." But late at night, when the house was quiet, Daniel noticed the silence. The rooms felt emptier without her footsteps, without her careful attempts to please him. He told himself he missed the routine, not her, but the truth itched beneath his skin. He checked his phone sometimes, expecting a message begging for forgiveness. None came. Meanwhile, Amara's world was changing. Slowly, carefully, but undeniably. The cafe job remained her anchor, but photography was beginning to stretch its wings. After the birthday party, word spread in small circles. Another family asked her to take photos at a christening. A local bakery hired her to capture pictures of their cakes for advertisements. A shop owner wanted photos of his handmade jewelry for an online store. Each job was modest, but each one added to her confidence. She began setting aside a separate envelope for photography money. The first time she added a crisp bill into that envelope, she smiled wider than she had in years. It wasn't about the amount, it was about proof. Proof that her dream was real, that Daniel's laughter had been wrong. Amara also invested time into her online presence. She posted her photos regularly, writing small captions about the beauty of ordinary things. A cracked teacup catching sunlight, a child's chalk drawings fading on a sidewalk, rain dripping from the edge of a roof. Strangers followed, liked, and commented. Some asked if her photos were for sale. She created simple prints, packaging them carefully at her desk and mailing them with trembling hands. When the first payment arrived in her account, she felt a rush of disbelief and joy. Her evenings were no longer haunted by silence. She filled them with editing photos, sketching ideas, or journaling her thoughts. Her words grew stronger. Where once she had written about fear, she now wrote about discovery. "I am not broken," one entry read. "I am becoming." But freedom came with struggles. Rent was still a burden, and there were weeks when she counted coins for groceries, wondering if she would make it through. Some nights she cried quietly, afraid she wasn't strong enough. Yet even in those moments, she didn't reach for Daniel. That door had closed, and she refused to open it again. Her confidence began to show in small ways. At the cafe, she no longer shrank when customers complained. She looked them in the eye, apologized calmly, and fixed the mistake. When Victor offered her more hours, she accepted with steady assurance. She even started saving to buy a newer camera, researching models late into the night. One afternoon, she took her camera to the park, hoping to capture the last colors of autumn. Children ran through piles of leaves, their laughter echoing across the grass. She crouched low, snapping pictures of a boy tossing leaves into the air, the golden sun catching each one mid-flight. Behind her, an older man with a paint-stained jacket watched curiously. "You've got an eye," he said. Amara turned, startled. I'm just practicing, the man chuckled. I've been painting for 40 years. Trust me, you're not just practicing, you see the world differently. Those words stayed with her. They were simple, but they carried a weight she had needed. She returned home that evening and pinned one of her photos on the wall. For the first time, she allowed herself to believe she might not just survive, she might thrive. Back in Daniel's world, things were unraveling. Without Amara, the small comforts of his life began to slip. The laundry piled higher than he liked. Meals were bland or missed altogether. His shirts weren't pressed, his shoes weren't polished. The house no longer smelled faintly of soap and coffee in the mornings. He told himself these were minor annoyances, but each one grated at him, reminding him of the gap she had left. He searched her social media accounts, but found nothing. Her old pages had gone silent. It infuriated him that she could disappear so completely. She thinks she can erase me? He muttered one night, scrolling through old photos of them together. He studied her face, looking for weakness, for the girl who once flinched at his raised voice. But the memory only made his chest burn hotter with anger. His friends stopped asking about her after a while. They grew tired of his dismissive answers, his forced laughter. Some suspected she wasn't coming back at all. Daniel noticed the shift in their eyes, the way they didn't quite believe him anymore. For a man who built his image on control, that loss of credibility stung deeply. Meanwhile, Amara was stepping into new light. A small gallery in the city announced an open call for local artists to display their work. The idea terrified her, but a friend from the cafe encouraged her. What's the worst that could happen? They say no? Then you're still where you are. But what if they say yes? Amara spent days selecting her best photos, printing them carefully, framing them with money she could barely spare. Her hands shook when she submitted them. Weeks later, an email arrived. Her work had been accepted for display. The night of the gallery showing, Amara stood in a simple dress, her heart pounding. People wandered through the room, pausing at her photos. She overheard strangers describing them as poetic, haunting, beautiful. One woman even asked if she could purchase a print. Amara left the gallery with tears in her eyes, not from sadness, but from joy too large to contain. She had built this moment. She had walked away from the man who said she couldn't live without him, and now strangers were paying money for pieces of her vision. That night, as she lay in her small room staring at the ceiling, she whispered to herself, I am free. Daniel, miles away, sat in his silent house, staring at his phone, still waiting for a message that would never come. Winter came early to the city. The wind was sharp, the streets glazed with frost, and breath hung in the air like smoke. Amara pulled her coat tighter as she hurried to the cafe one morning, her camera slung over her shoulder. Months ago, she had been a stranger in this city, trembling with fear, unsure if she would last even a week. Now, as she walked briskly through the streets, she realized something. She belonged here. Her photography had begun to take shape as more than a hobby. After the gallery showing, her social media following grew quickly. Strangers from other cities, and even other countries, started leaving comments, asking if she sold prints or if she took commissions. Each message filled her with awe. She would sit at her tiny desk at night, packaging prints to ship, her name scrawled in careful letters on the envelopes. At the cafe, Victor noticed the change in her. You've got a light in your eyes lately, he said one afternoon, as he slid a plate of muffins toward her. What's going on? Amara hesitated, then smiled shyly. I think people actually like my photos. I've sold some prints, Victor raised his brows, genuinely impressed. That's no small thing. Don't sell yourself short, his words stayed with her. For so long, she had lived under Daniel's shadow, shrinking smaller every time he laughed at her. Now, with every compliment, with every sale, she was stretching into her own space, learning that her voice mattered. But growth didn't come without fear. Some nights, she lay awake worrying about money, about whether the customers would keep coming, about whether she was foolish to think photography could ever be a career. Yet each morning, when she picked up her camera, She felt something stronger than fear. She felt alive. One weekend, she photographed a winter festival in the city square. Children skating on ice, couples sipping hot cocoa, lanterns glowing against the night sky. She posted the photos online, and within days, one of them went viral. It was an image of a little girl holding her mother's hand, her mittened fingers clutching tightly as snowflakes melted in her hair. The tenderness of the moment struck people deeply. The photo was shared thousands of times, landing on blogs, news sites, and even the front page of a popular magazine's digital edition. Amara sat in stunned silence when she saw it. Her inbox flooded with messages from people praising her work, asking to collaborate, offering to buy the rights to use her photos. Her phone buzzed nonstop for days. That moment marked a turning point. She wasn't just a cafe worker who took photos on the side anymore. She was becoming an artist people recognized. Meanwhile, Daniel's world was unraveling further. The house he once ruled felt heavier with each passing day. The silence was unbearable. He had started drinking more, telling himself it was just to pass the evenings, but deep down, he knew it was to fill the emptiness Amara had left. At work, he grew shorter with colleagues, snapping at them when things didn't go his way. His once polished appearance began to slip. Wrinkled shirts, unshaven mornings, late arrivals. People who used to admire him now whispered about him behind his back. He felt the loss of respect like a slow bleed, but he didn't connect it to Amara's absence. Instead, he blamed her. "She ruined me," he muttered one night, staring at an old photo of them together. "Ungrateful. She couldn't have made it without me." But in truth, it was her absence that revealed how fragile his world had been. He had built his pride not on strength, but on control. And without someone to control, he was hollow. Amara, on the other hand, was filling her life with color. She saved enough to buy a new camera, one that captured details with stunning clarity. Holding it in her hands felt like holding a piece of her future. She also moved into a slightly larger apartment, not luxurious, but bright and warm, with a window that overlooked the bustling street below. For the first time in her adult life, she decorated a space for herself. She hung her photos on the walls, placed a vase of flowers on the table, and lit candles in the evenings. Her journal entries shifted too. Instead of writing about survival, she began writing about gratitude, about possibility, about the people who supported her journey. "I am not who I was," one entry read. "I am stronger, freer, and I am becoming the person I always dreamed of." One evening, she received an email from a nonprofit organization that worked with children in underserved communities. They had seen her viral photo and wanted to hire her to document their programs. The thought of using her photography to help others made her chest ache with joy. She accepted immediately. That project took her to schools, community centers, and playgrounds. She captured children laughing, learning, and dreaming, moments of hope that deserved to be remembered. Parents thanked her. Teachers praised her. For Amara, it was more than work. It was purpose. But as she soared, Daniel sank deeper. He scrolled through social media one night, and to his shock, he stumbled upon her photo, the one of the little girl in the snow. He stared at it, the credit line beneath reading, "Photography by Amara Lynn." His jaw clenched. He had mocked her dream for years, told her no one would ever pay for her pictures. Yet here it was, her name attached to an image admired by thousands. His chest burned with something he refused to call regret. He threw his phone onto the couch, pacing the room, muttering curses. "She thinks she's better than me now," he growled. "She'll fall." They always fall, but deep down, the truth gnawed at him. Amara hadn't fallen. She had risen, higher than he ever imagined she could. For Amara, there was no thought of him anymore. Her days were full, her nights peaceful. She no longer flinched at shadows, no longer doubted her worth. She had learned to stand on her own, and with each photograph she took, she was building a future that belonged entirely to her. And while Daniel sat alone in his empty house, convinced she couldn't live without him, Amara was out in the world proving, every single day, that she could live not only without him, but far better than she ever had with him. The city bloomed in spring, the kind of bloom that seemed to announce renewal with every petal. Amara walked through streets lined with cherry blossoms, the air alive with music from open shop doors, and she realized how much her world had changed. It had been over a year since she slipped quietly from Daniel's house, a year since she closed the door on fear, on control, on the belief that she was nothing without him. Now she wasn't just living, she was flourishing. Her name had begun to carry weight in circles she once thought were unreachable. The photo of the little girl in the snow had not been a one-time spark. It was the beginning of a fire. Invitations arrived in her inbox, galleries asking her to contribute, nonprofits requesting her eye to tell their stories, publications offering features. Amara accepted each with gratitude, pouring herself into the work. Every click of her camera was an act of defiance against the voice that once told her she was worthless. The solo exhibition became the crown jewel of her year. She remembered arriving at the gallery, her palms damp with nerves, her heart pounding against her ribs. The walls were lined with her photos. Children chasing balloons, women laughing under umbrellas, old men playing chess in the park. The quiet beauty of small details most people overlooked. People wandered the space, pointing, smiling, asking questions. A reporter even interviewed her, scribbling notes as she spoke shyly about finding beauty in ordinary life. When she stood in front of her favorite photo, a close-up of raindrops sliding down a bus window, blurring the city lights into streaks of color, she overheard a woman whisper to her friend, "You can feel her heart in these." For Amara, those words were worth more than the sales that followed. Because for years, her heart had been silenced, dismissed, mocked. Now strangers felt it in her work, and that was proof enough that she had reclaimed it. Her apartment reflected her growth too. No longer bare and temporary, it became a sanctuary of light. Plants thrived on the windowsill, her walls were filled with framed prints of her favorite photos, and her desk was always scattered with film rolls, editing notes, and half-finished sketches of ideas. A small bookshelf grew heavier with novels and art books she bought secondhand. For the first time in her adult life, she allowed herself to create a space that was hers, purely hers. Yet even with all her success, she never forgot the quiet promise she made to herself on that first bus ride: to live, not just survive. So she gave back. She volunteered with the nonprofit that had hired her, teaching children how to hold a camera, how to see beauty in their own neighborhoods. She watched their eyes light up when they captured their first image, and it filled her with a joy she could hardly put into words. Daniel, meanwhile, was unraveling in silence. The house that had once felt like his kingdom became a prison. Without Amara, its walls echoed too loudly. Meals were empty, laundry piled up, dust settled in corners. He told himself he didn't miss her, only her usefulness. But when he opened the closet and found one of her old scarves tucked in the back, his throat tightened in a way he didn't understand. He sat on the bed, clutching the fabric, anger and sorrow twisting together in his chest. His friends had long stopped asking about her. At work, whispers followed him. Late arrivals, careless mistakes, bursts of temper. He drank more, slept less, and stared at his phone, waiting for a message that never came. He sometimes typed out a cruel text to send her, but he always deleted it, knowing silence was worse. One evening, scrolling aimlessly online, he stumbled upon her name again. This time, it wasn't just a photo. It was an article. Amara Lynn, the photographer who captures hope in the everyday. His jaw clenched as he read the lines praising her resilience, her eye for detail, her rise from nothing to recognition. His hands trembled with rage, the phone screen blurring as he muttered, "She thinks she's better than me." But beneath the anger was a truth he could not admit. She had proven him wrong. Amara, on the other hand, thought of Daniel less and less. His voice no longer echoed in her head. She no longer heard his mockery when she picked up her camera, no longer felt his shadow when she laughed with friends. She had reclaimed herself so fully that the life she once lived seemed like someone else's story. On the anniversary of her leaving, she returned to the shore where it all began. The ocean roared with the same strength as before, the tide rolling and steady and unstoppable. She walked barefoot along the sand, her camera in hand, and captured the horizon as the sun dipped low, turning the waves gold. Standing there, the memory of that younger version of herself came back. The girl who had stood on this same shore, aching for freedom, too afraid to believe she could take it. Now, here she was, living proof that she could. She closed her eyes, breathed in the salt air, and whispered, "I made it." This was not revenge. It wasn't about proving Daniel wrong anymore. It was about proving herself right, that she was worthy of love, of dreams, of a life that belonged to her. She walked away from the ocean that evening with a smile, her steps steady, her camera full of light. She knew her journey was only beginning. The world was wide, and she was ready to capture every piece of it. Daniel thought she couldn't live without him, but Amara didn't just live. She soared. Follow for daily stories of strength and courage,